Wonderful pleasure to be back with you again this afternoon. Do our public service announcement first. Have our prospect list cards that I hope you have, and if for some reason the dog ate it or you lost it or it got torched up in a rainstorm, we have more out on the evangelism table for you. So put 10 names of people that you know and pray for them every day. The Lord will open doors for us to be able to do that. On the back, there's a lot of life as events that we need to be on the lookout for with those people. And when they occur, we can turn that in and have the opportunity to write cards or to visit them or to meet needs in other ways. And so be prayerful of that this week. We're going to spend time in Genesis tonight, specifically the life of Joseph. Sometimes it's difficult for us to be able to walk through all the intricacies of providence, of how God provides. And I'm going to recommend an excellent resource for you because it's available for free online. I believe it was in 1989, but the Power Lectures in South Haven, Mississippi, held one called The Providence of God. And all great minds of the brotherhood that are included in that particular lecture have a lot of good resource for us wrapping our head around God's providence. How does it work? What is it? What is it not? Is all important. And so tonight I want us to make the demonstration of God's providence through the life of Joseph. So most of tonight's material is not me. I'm letting God speak, and that's the way that it should be. And so let's start in Genesis 15. Genesis 15, this is going to be long before Joseph is born. And this is God talking to Abram. He said, "No, certainly," verses 13 through 16. I probably need to give you that. Genesis 15, 13 through 16. "And he said to Abram, 'Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete.'" So now that we're on this side of history, we can look back and know that God was talking about Egypt. He was talking about his people will go in and be slaves to Egypt and be afflicted 400 years. But they weren't nearly that big when they went out. We say that they came out 2 million or 3 million strong. But they didn't go in like that. There is a lot that takes place to get to that point of them being in Egypt. The story of Joseph will tell us how it happened, but I'll warn you, it's a rather wild ride. But in the back of your mind, everything that we talk about, I want you to have fixed in there providence. God providing for his own will. All right, let's start. It's not full of miracles. It's not full of signs and wonders. In fact, throughout his life, there's only 2 times that the supernatural occurs. They're the miracles where God gives Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. But other than that, his life is just like yours and mine, with people making decisions and doing things, both good and evil, yet God will work it all out for his good. In the beginning, Isaac marries Rebekah, and for 20 years she's barren. She can have no children. Isaac pleads for her, and the Lord grants this plea. Look at Genesis 25, 23 through 26. "And the Lord said to her," that's Rebekah, "2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." So when Rachel's days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, and so they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. And then we look down through their story, and that Isaac loved Esau because of his venison. He was a hunter and evidently a good cook. And Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac in his old age was ready to pronounce the patriarchal blessing upon Esau. But that wasn't the prophecy. The prophecy was that Jacob would receive that blessing, and so Rebekah sneaks Jacob in there all dressed up like ruddy Esau and steals the blessing. Well, Esau's furious and he seeks to kill Jacob, so Jacob flees to his uncle Laban's, and he was seeking a wife. Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, and so he agreed to work for 7 years. But on his wedding night, there was a switcheroo, and Leah comes in and is his wife. But he still loved Rachel. That's not a substitute he was willing to accept. And so he'll work another 7 years for the one that he loved, Rachel. And between the 2 wives and the 2 handmaidens, Jacob has 12 sons. 2 of them are by his beloved Rachel. And they are Joseph, who we're talking about tonight, and his younger brother Benjamin. All right, we're going to fast forward. So now we're in Genesis 37. The brothers' hatred. Why did Joseph's brothers hate him? And that's the word the Bible uses. They hated him. Genesis 37:2. When Joseph was 17, he was sent to check on his brothers, and he gave his father a bad report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So we're talking about the highest degree here. Israel's favoritism and special gift has a way of arousing jealousy among the siblings. And then he dreamed dreams. And in these dreams, it's quite obvious that his family is bowing down to him, all of them older than him, with the exception of Benjamin. He would say, "Indeed, your sheaves stood tall all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And he said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun and the moon," his parents, "and 11 stars bow down to me." And so then in Genesis 37:8, it would say that they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And so we move on to the next section of Joseph's life that I call Time to Make a Move. The brothers are out tending to the flocks when Joseph comes up in Genesis 37. And the brothers, in verse 18, their original plot is, we're going to kill him. We hate him that much that we're going to kill him. But they opt for a lesser evil. They sell Joseph to Ishmaelite slave traders for 20 pieces of silver. They concoct a lie to tell their father, or at least allow their father to assume the worst. They bring back his coat of many colors, unmistakable to all of them, dipped in blood. And they allow Jacob to make his own assumption. Oh, he's been torn by a wild beast. And he mourns him for many days. But what happens to Joseph? Yes, he's sold into slavery, but he's not dead. And he gets sold into a man Potiphar, his house. He was an officer of Pharaoh, an Egyptian captain of the guard. And this is where Joseph lands after being sold into slavery. We're in Genesis 39 now. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under Joseph's authority. Potiphar's house was greatly blessed because Joseph had integrity and character. Even in bad times, you and I can maintain our integrity, and good things can come from misfortune in our lives. That's a side note that I want you to take from all of these events that we're going to go through tonight. Joseph stayed true to who he was, and he stayed true to his God. He did not give up. He did not give any less effort, right? He worked, even though he's in the worst situation. All his brothers hate him. They sold him into slavery. He's now the slave of another man. But that didn't keep him from being who God would have him to be. And then, unfortunately, Potiphar's wife lays eyes on Joseph in a most unlawful way. It came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, can you imagine that he did not heed her to lie with her, to be with her. Joseph refused sin. Regardless of the circumstance in his life, that didn't cause him to give up. She takes advantage of a day when they're in the house alone and accuses Joseph of attempting to be with her. Potiphar has Joseph thrown into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And I've always found that interesting, right? Why did he get thrown into the prison where the king's prisoners are and not a common prison? And this will come into play later on. But have you ever wondered that? I mean, I guess with Potiphar being high up, he wanted to do that. Or maybe he didn't altogether believe his wife's claims. That's speculation on my part. But he had to put him in a prison where he could keep his eye on him. Joseph remains a man of integrity and high moral character. His activity in prison is so good that they make him the keeper of the prison. And he's going down, right? He went from slave to prisoner. But he's the same Joseph, productive wherever he goes, and he's elevated. Genesis 39, 21 and 20 through 23. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. He trusted him. Before the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. And it was obvious to anybody that had come in contact with Joseph. When we are who we are supposed to be, God will bless us. That's a promise. Even when life seems to be in the ditch, which I think we would all agree Joseph was not in a good place. Joseph encounters two of the king's chiefs in this prison. Don't you remember it's here where the butler and the baker get thrown into prison? Well, Joseph's the keeper of the prison, and so he's going to interact with these men. In Genesis 40, a butler and a baker were thrown into prison by Pharaoh himself. And Joseph's in charge of all the inmates, so he gets their story and he becomes acquainted with them. Each of them dream a dream. And this is one of the miracles. The Lord gives Joseph the ability to interpret each of those dreams for the baker and for the butler. It's a good outcome for the butler. He'll be restored to his job in 3 days. The baker, not so fortunate. He will be killed. Genesis 40, 14 and 15. Joseph says, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I also have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon." Verse 23. Sadly, it says, "Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." It would be 2 more years before Pharaoh would hear. He has a dream, one that troubled him greatly. And none of his magicians, none of his wise men or philosophers are able to interpret this dream for Pharaoh. 2 years later, it is the butler that goes, "Oh, I remember there's a guy that could interpret dreams." So he brings him. "Bring me the Hebrew prisoner." We'll fast forward a little bit more because Joseph does interpret the dream for him. Pharaoh thinks so highly of it that now we're going to discuss Joseph in Pharaoh's house, Genesis 41, 37 through 44. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this," there was going to be 7 years of famine and then 7 years of plenty, 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine. And it's only because of Joseph's interpretation that they are going to know that it's coming and they'll be prepared. So we'll pick up in the reading. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand, and he put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed them in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he let him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." I told you it was a wild ride. Here's a man hated by his brothers, thrown in a pit to be killed. Let's not do that. We'll sell him into slavery. He becomes a prisoner. Now he's in the second chariot behind Pharaoh. Is our God good? Joseph has two sons while he's under Pharaoh's hand, and they're a testimony for his faith in God. The first one he names Manasseh, causing to forget. And this is actually sad and unfortunate, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. You're like, why would he name his first son that? I would submit to you because his father never came looking for him. And Joseph didn't know what went on after they sold him into slavery. I mean, he thought, my dad's going to come look for me. And when he never did, he was sad about that. And when he has his own son, he says, God has made me forget all my toil in my father's house. Now, he'll get the story corrected when Judah gives his plea in front of him later on. But I always find that interesting. Nothing ever happened. Joseph didn't know. And he named his second one Ephraim, doubly fruitful. For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. He's going to save Egypt, but he's going to do more than that. A famine arose in Canaan in Genesis 42, where his father's house is. Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dream and his management of the land had caused plenty of food to be in the storehouses in Egypt, but not in Canaan. And so Jacob sends these sons that hate him so much to the land of Egypt to buy grain. His request, when they meet Jacob, they come calling for grain. Joseph doesn't reveal himself. He fills all their sacks with grain and their money as well. And his request is that they return with the youngest, his brother Benjamin, while Simeon is held hostage to ensure that they come back. It's at this point that Joseph sees the result of his tribulations. In Genesis 45, verses 4 through 8, and Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother." This is on the second trip back with Benjamin, "whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here." Listen to his recognition. "For God sent me before you to preserve life." He may have not known that when he was in the pit, fearing for his life. He may have not known that when the Ishmaelites are bartering with Potiphar to be sold into slavery, or when he's in prison, he's not sure what's going to happen. Even when the butler gets released, he has to wait 2 more years to be able to get out of there. He may not have known all of that, but he knows when his brothers come to get grain and he's able to provide for them, he said, "God sent me to preserve life." For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. In Genesis 46 and 47, Joseph will bring all of his father's house to Egypt because there are 5 more years of famine. And the infant nation, 70 souls, will be preserved in the most unlikely way. What a sequence of events demonstrating to us that God's plans are not derailed by man's hatred or poor decisions. God made good on his promise where we started back in Genesis 15. 13 to 16, speaking to Abraham, he made good on that promise to Abraham. He said, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And even that will be a part of the extended providence of God, bringing about his will. Moses will complete this prophecy during the Exodus and overthrow of Pharaoh in the Red Sea centuries later. But for now, they will prosper into a great people, even in bondage. They went in 70 and came out millions. But see, that's only because Egypt was a large enough nation to be able to protect them while they grew. Now it's time for us to see how God is doing good for us. And I want to remind you that there was a lot of heartbreak and a lot of mistreatment and a lot of sorrow and hard times over many years for Joseph. But he realized God was saving his family and that would one day become a great nation and be part of the seed line that would produce the Christ, the Savior of the world. Now, Roy Deaver concluded his sermon with a section titled "The Chain of Divine Providence" in the sermon that I spoke about in the Power Lectures in 1989. And here's what he said. In order to fully appreciate providence, can we work from the end to the beginning? Jacob and his family are now in Egypt, situated comfortably in the land of Goshen. Here they have the blessings and opportunities for growth and development. Here they can multiply exceedingly, and here they can be kept a separate people. But how did they get here? Answer, Joseph had sent for them to come. But how was it that Joseph was in position to send for them and to promise to take care of them? Answer, he was the prime minister of Egypt. Well, how did he become the prime minister of Egypt? He was appointed to this position by Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. But why was he appointed to this position? Because there was a desperate need for such an appointment, and the appointment of a man of wisdom, and in whom was the Spirit of God. But how was it that Pharaoh had learned that Joseph was such a man? By the power of God, he had the ability to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. But how was it that Joseph had come to interpret Pharaoh's dreams? First is the fact that Pharaoh had had the dream, but secondly, the fact that Pharaoh had learned that Joseph could interpret dreams. But how and from whom did Pharaoh learn that Joseph could do this? Well, it was the butler. But how was it that the butler was in a position to give this information to Pharaoh? First would be the fact that for 2 full years, the butler had forgotten to remember a man whom he had met in prison, a man who could interpret dreams. And second, he had learned about this man and his ability to interpret dreams when this man interpreted his dream. But how was it that the butler had an opportunity to meet and to learn of this man's ability to interpret dreams? Because he, that is the butler and the baker, had both had dreams. They both had the dream while they were in prison, in the king's prison, not the common prison, in the same prison where Joseph was held a prisoner. Suppose Joseph had not been in this prison at this time. What would have happened? But how was it that Joseph had come to be in this particular prison at this particular time? Potiphar had caused Joseph to be placed in this prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And this special consideration likely involved the fact that Potiphar at least doubted the claims that his wife made in regard to Joseph. But why? Why was Joseph cast into prison? Because Potiphar's wife had falsely accused Joseph and had lied about him, claiming that Joseph had sought to take advantage of her. But how was it that she would have the opportunity to make such accusations? Because in Joseph, carrying out his duties with regard to the household was often in the house. Well, how was it that he came to be in one that was charged of the household and to perform the duties within the house? Well, he had been placed in this position by Potiphar, to whom Joseph belonged. Well, how was it that Joseph came to belong to Potiphar? Potiphar had bought him from the Ishmaelites. But how did the Ishmaelites come to be in possession of Joseph? They bought Joseph from his own brothers. But why was it that Joseph's own brothers wanted to sell him? Because they hated him? Because they wanted to get rid of him? They had determined to kill Joseph, but then decided to sell him to the Ishmaelite merchantmen. What if the Ishmaelite merchantmen had not been crossing by at the time they hatched the new plan? Why did Joseph's brothers hate Joseph? Because their father's special love for him and his ability to dream dreams. But why did the father have his special love for Joseph? Because of the fine character of Joseph, because Joseph was the son of his beloved Rachel, and because Joseph was the son of Jacob's old age. Well, how is it that Jacob came to know and to love Rachel? Well, he met her in the house of Laban, his mother's brother. But how was it that Jacob came to be at Laban's? He was compelled to leave. Compelled, that's an interesting word. To leave his own house because his brother Esau had threatened to kill him. Why would Esau threaten to kill Jacob? Because Jacob, with his own mother, had tricked Isaac into pronouncing upon Jacob the patriarchal blessing, which Isaac intended to pronounce upon Esau. But why would Esau want this blessing to go to Esau in spite of what God had said? Because of his own partiality toward Esau. But why this partiality? And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. He didn't cause the brothers to hate. He didn't cause Potiphar's wife to lust and to lie. God didn't cause the Ishmaelite slave traders to pass by when they did. What we've seen tonight is Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Do we see providence? Do we understand it? It doesn't always work in a way that humans get to call fair, right? But it is to God's glory, and he's done marvelous things for us and to us. God's providential blessings are for his children. Are you one? To become one, God would say that you must believe in his Son, that he is deity, that he is the Christ, that the Old Testament said was coming, that the gospel said is here, and that the letters in Revelation say is coming again. You must repent. It's a change of mind that leads to a change of action. I have a new master to serve. It's God Almighty. We need to confess that. We need to confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and be baptized to wash away our sins. The rest of your life, God will use you in ways that will bring glory and honor to his kingdom if you'll let him. And those that are Christians, have you turned your back on God? Are there sometimes maybe you didn't realize that his providence is working for the better good, and so you're not handling being in the ditch or in the pit that well? And here's something about that. Sometimes we throw ourselves in the pit, not hateful family members. But as long as we draw breath, we can climb out of that pit. We don't have to be sold into the slavery of sin anymore. Is that you? If it is, God stands waiting to forgive you, and we'd invite you to come forward now as we stand and sing.